First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for taking out the time to come on my platform. I really appreciate you and the work that you have done, and I definitely look forward to hearing more about what you do.
Okay, it's my pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor. It's really an honor. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are, where you're from, and definitely what do you do?
Okay, sure. My name is Blaine Flowers. I'm a professor at the University of Miami. I've been there for over 30 years, and I teach and I create research. So those are the two things I mostly do. I've had a lot of other jobs, but that's all I do now.
Wow, that's really amazing. You've been doing this almost 3 decades now. I would like to know when did you develop this passion for education and psychology? Is this something that you wanted to do since you were younger, or did you kind of get into it later in life?
Well, I almost have to ask you how long a story do you want because it's a very long story. Um, but basically, when I was an undergraduate, I took a psychology introduction course and I hated it, so I didn't take another one for 2 years. Then I just thought maybe I found out I like to teach, so I thought maybe I'd go into education. And they had me take more psychology courses, and I liked them better than the education courses. And so then I decided to major in psychology. And it was an on again, off again decision about whether or not to become a professor. So I could have gone the route of practice, which is what a lot of psychologists do. Um, but then when I was in my doctoral studies at the University of Texas, I discovered that there was something that I really wanted to say and that I was uniquely qualified to say it. So that launched me on this career, and I've been at it now for 35 years. So it was a very lasting commitment I made.
Wow, wow, that's very inspiring. Now I can ask you, what courses do you teach in particular?
Well, one of the courses I teach every year is an undergraduate course called Character and Community Development. And it's really about the idea of people developing virtues and how communities play a role in that development. Um, so that's a very fun course that I teach each year. I often teach a introduction to research course, sometimes teach a course in counseling ethics. Um, and I just developed a new course on human flourishing that's going to be offered for the first time this spring.
Oh, okay. Wow, that definitely sounds interesting. Now I wanted to ask you about some of your books. Now, which book is your latest book?
Let me think about it. I think the most recent book is uh, called The Science of Virtue. So, in that book, what we do is talk about all the research that's been done on virtues, but then we go on to give a bunch of ideas about how people could continue to do this research and create a science of virtue. Right now, it's a fairly fragmented domain where there really aren't very good theories involved, and people are just sort of using their intuitions a lot. Uh, this includes researchers, so we wanted to help to develop a more scientific basis for it. What's true now is that there's enough evidence that we can detect virtues and we can measure them and we can have a pretty good idea of what a good characteristic is, like say humility or honesty or courage or justice, fairness. Um, those are things that we can measure in people, and it's very cool that we can do that because for a long time psychology was pretty stuck in the idea that we could measure things like personality, but we couldn't measure things like virtue. And now it's clear that we can do both.
Wow, okay, that's really amazing. Now I can ask you, in terms of virtue, is this something that we're born with? Are we born courageous, or do we learn from other people, or do we, how do we get into that?
Well, the answer that I always give to either of our questions is yes. That some people are born a little bit more timid or anxious than others. Uh, that's pretty obvious if you're around very many babies, that some are born pretty anxious. Um, but all of us can develop courage, whether we're born with it or not. And to Develop a virtue means that we have to work on it. We have to practice it, and we have to understand it, and we have to make it a part of ourselves. I'll give you one little example. My daughter is a very generous person. She always has been. But she developed a more mature form of generosity over time. She's an adult now. She was just a very grateful person and very generous person right from the beginning, but she developed that into more of a mature characteristic now. And that's the goal of virtues, is to develop good characteristics that are mature and that we only use them when they're appropriate. So one of the things people worry about is if you're generous or kind, won't you get exploited? The answer to that question is not if you have those as virtues, because you understand that there are exploitive people and there are exploitive situations, and you don't make yourself vulnerable to those. That's part of what it means to understand virtues. You know when it's appropriate and when it's not, or what degree of it is appropriate. So sometimes we don't know. And so let's say we might be kind in general, and that leads to people seeing us as vulnerable to exploitation. So someone might try to take advantage of us. And for a while, the kind person is probably going to give the person the benefit of the doubt. But once it becomes clear that they have an exploitive intent, then you withdraw that kindness because it's inappropriate now. You know that they're interested in taking advantage of you. I think it's helpful to know that. My students in this undergraduate class I referred to don't like the idea that there might be evil people in the world, people who have vices, but I know that there are. And one of the things about youth is you can fool yourself and think everybody's a nice person, a good person. And I just don't think that's true. And it's really helpful to know that there are people to avoid and people to not support, because the things that they want to do are not good things. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to be wise about those things, not kind of foolish and open to anything. So Aristotle would have agreed with this. He was very much a realist. He's the philosopher that I follow the most. And he was very clear that wisdom was a really important thing, and that sometimes we have to protect ourselves, or sometimes we have to extend ourselves. So it just depends on the situation what we need to do. But we're always looking out to try to bring goodness into the world. And so if it's possible, that's what we want to do. And sometimes it's not possible. And so you have to just be more protective. And I think that's true for just about anybody. But if you were to go to a place where there's a lot of violence and a lot of exploitation, you would learn pretty quickly that you have to take care of yourself a lot in those places. So it's a balance. We try to do the things that are going to bring goodness into the world, and when that's not possible, we just do the best we can. So that's I really agree with that philosophy. It's a way of, I think, being very realistic about the world.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you breaking that down, because I could see that in some of my family members. I mean, they're extremely nice. They're extremely giving. Like my mom, she help anybody, everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
she have helped family members, and they'll take advantage of her. They won't look at it like, oh, she helping me, so let me do the right thing. They'll look at
Mm-hmm.
it as a way to take advantage of her. But then my father, he's like the opposite. He don't want to help nobody because he don't want nobody to get over on them. You know what I'm saying? So you got to
Yeah.
find a balance. So I keep that in
Yeah.
mind.
So maybe they could teach each other.
Yeah, definitely. Now I have to ask you, in terms of the research and writing a book like this, how long does it actually take?
This particular book took quite a while. I mean, it's interesting because it started out as a journal article, and I sat down to write it, and I wrote the journal article very fast. It just basically was already ready to be written, and it was just a matter of letting the ideas come through the keyboard. Then I decided at one point to turn it into a book, and that took a little bit longer because it's a much longer effort, and you have to work with various co-author schedules. And it was also during the time of COVID that we were writing it. So that really slowed us down. I think there were three authors, myself, Brad Coquelet, and um, Nathan Leonhardt. And I think all of us got COVID during that period. Um, and so it slowed us down, but it took about, I would say, 3 years to write it and get it published.
Wow. Okay. I really appreciate you taking out the time to work on a project like that because it makes you,
Mm.
think about life and you can learn so much just from, that topic. Now, I can ask you one more question. Since you were writing it around the time of the pandemic and considering post pandemic, have there been, I guess, a significant change in people's uh, level of virtue, or is it about the same? Are people more cautious, or like for example, like you say about giving or something like that?
Mhm.
Has it had it major shift, or is it roughly the same?
Um, it's hard to answer that. It's such a big question. So I think people are quite different. Some people, of course, became more virtuous as a result of the pandemic. Some people maybe became more jaded or less likely to do good things. Um, I think if you look at our politics, it's certainly gotten meaner in that time. Um, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that, that we're more divided and more likely to try to hurt each other in some way if we have disagreements. Um, and so, from that perspective, it looks like things have gotten worse. But I don't know if that's related to the pandemic or not. I think that's a trend that's been going on for decades. It's just gotten tougher and tougher.
Okay, okay. Now let me see. I wanted to ask you about a few other books that you have. Retrieving Practical Wisdom in Psychology, Philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and Education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a book I wrote with Christian Christiansen, who's a philosopher at the University of Birmingham in England. And we had actually done quite a bit of work on phronesis before that. That's the Greek word for practical wisdom. Um, and so that's the title of the book. That's what it means is practical wisdom. So it's about making good decisions as we go through life. Um, one of the things I do with my students in the undergraduate course is I just ask them, it's kind of a rhetorical question, really. But the question is, how many decisions do you think you make every day? And the answer is a million. I mean, there's just so many decisions. It's like, what's the next sentence I want to say? Um, where do I want to go for dinner? Or what do I want to eat for dinner? Or what time do I get up? It just goes on and on and on. Um, and a lot of these decisions aren't terribly important. Some of them are, but all of them kind of come together in making us a more or less wise person. So if we're able to take multiple things into account, if we're able to understand which virtues are called for and how to express them, then we would be a more wise person. If we're kind of prone to making very short-term decisions and doing things that give us immediate advantage but aren't much helpful in the long term, then we're probably a less wise person. So it sounds like a very um, abstract concept, but it's actually quite concrete and it's part of all of our lives. And so the idea of virtue is that we cultivate our habits and we try to make ourselves the kind of person we would like to be. Um, and so, and that happens in those everyday choices and everyday actions. And so the more often a person is honest, the more likely they are to be honest the next time there's an opportunity for that. Or if a person is going to be fair, if they're fair generally, then it's going to come naturally that one would treat other people fairly. Um, and the same is true of vice, actually. So if we're going to be exploitive or domineering, then we cultivate those characteristics so that they come naturally to us. And we are a vicious person by nature and by habit. Um, so, what I think what we all need to realize is there are people who look around and they identify people they can victimize. That's how they go through life. Um, and so this is a habit. This is something they do without even thinking about it. They just know that someone looks vulnerable and they respond to that by doing whatever it is that they do. They might be violent. Um, they might do something that's financially exploitive. but that's what they do. It's normal for them, and so they tend to be better at it than we are. So what most of us want to do is to cultivate the virtues. And the truth is that the majority of people we can be kind to, we can be honest with, we can be fair with, and we're going to get a good response. And there's just a minority of people who will take advantage of that. So you kind of have to know which is which.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's very interesting. Like you say, cultivating habits because, like you say,
Mhm.
something negative could happen to you, like somebody breaking your house. Like that could be a
Yeah,
one-time event, and you would remember that forever. But this person probably breaking people's house 100 times. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah.
It's unfortunate. Let me see.
Yep. Um, so we want to become experts at doing the right thing, doing, bringing goodness into the world, so that comes naturally and spontaneously. It's not something we have to work at or struggle with. That's one of the things I really like about virtue, is that um, we want to make things second nature, so that they happen. It's almost by themselves. So it's an instinct or a real strong inclination to be fair with someone, for example. Um, and I think that's a great thing. Um, so if you were to ask people what do they want in a best friend, or what do they want in a romantic partner, these are the kind of things that they would mention: trustworthiness, fairness, kindness, sense of humor. So things that line up really easily as virtues. Um, that is what we want. We want people in our lives who are we can rely on them. We can depend on them. We can love them and not worry about how they're going to treat us. They're going to treat us well. Um,
Okay, okay. Now let me see. I wanted to ask you about this one, the evolution of ethics.
hmm. That was a book. Now that one took a long time to write. That one took more like 5 years, because I had so much to learn. Um, the premise of the book is that human beings are ethical creatures. Um, and what I mean by that is not that we're always ethical, it's that we care about ethics, that we think about it. So every society develops its own version of ethics, or every group could be smaller than a society. Um, and and it's the sort of thing that we're naturally inclined to do. So if you think about why would we do that, well, from an evolutionary point of view, it made a lot of sense to do things that made it easy to get along in a community, because so much of what human beings do is a group effort. Um, and if you think about, like, what is it about us that's made us so strong and resilient in the world, it's that we bond together as groups. We have social relationships. So we have mutual defense. We have a division of labor, which, if you go to hunter gatherers, that division of labor looks like some people do the hunting while other people do the gathering. Some people do the um, childcare. Other people are wayfinders. They know how to locate water. Um, but even in our big cities, it seems like we're living independently. We are immensely dependent on each other. So the division of labor is even stronger in an urbanized, um, uh, uh, financially sophisticated world, because we depend on each other for so much. So if I need help with my plumbing, I call the plumber because I don't know how to do that. If I need help with fixing the siding on my house, I call somebody who does that. If I need some help with accounting, I call an accountant. I can't know all those things. It's not possible to know all those things. So we depend on each other tremendously, and that's really important. So one of the reasons that ethics evolved is because we need to be able to depend on each other, and we need to know who is trustworthy and who is not, um, so that we can cooperate with the trustworthy people and not cooperate with the other people, because people who aren't trustworthy tend to take advantage. So you'll cooperate with them, you'll give them part of your food, for example, and then they don't give you anything back, or they don't reciprocate in any way. Whereas the trustworthy people will reciprocate in a way that now it's good for everybody. Because if I have a lot of bananas, it's really a good idea for me to trade some bananas for some meat, or for some apples, or for some potatoes. Um, and so we're all better off when we do that. And that's how ethics evolve for human beings. And there are a variety of things. Cooperation is one of them that comes naturally to us. We're naturally cooperative. people sometimes look at me funny when I say that, because what you will remember is all the people who were not cooperative and the people who didn't give you any consideration. The reason we remember that is because we notice it. It's highly salient. Something we should notice because, oh, well, that person's not a good person to cooperate with. We just learned that. Um, so, but on average, in the day-to-day world, the vast majority of people are cooperative. Think about how we drive. I mean, we drive cooperatively for the most part. I mean, there are a few bozos out there who drive in ways that put us all in danger, but most people drive very cooperatively. If we're walking on a sidewalk, we walk cooperatively. We try not to bump into each other. We try to accommodate each other. Um, and the list goes on and on. There's a lot of cooperation. So that's one thing. Another thing is friendship. Friendship is extremely important to human beings. We can't live without friends. Um, and so what Aristotle said is you can't have a good life unless you have morally good friends. And I think that's true. So if I have people around me that I have some degree of friendship with, but really I'm worried about them taking advantage of me, I'm going to be so busy being vigilant that I'm not going to have time to do good things. Um, Whereas if I have people around me who are morally good friends, then I know that they're going to support me and they're going to help and they're going to be there for me when I need something from them. And that's a wonderful thing. And we're going to be able to spend time, even mundane activities together, in a way that we enjoy and we feel good about. Um, and so there's a lot of value in that. But human beings evolved to have friends. That's something that you don't have to teach a child. They understand the value of friendship and they seek it out as in the best way that they can. I mean, the younger they are, the less they can do it. But over time, people learn how, they just know how to have friends. It's not really even something we learn from each other. Although we can learn from our friends, of course. But that's one of the great things about friendship is it's a superb learning opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Friends are vital because they could make you or they could break you. So it's very important to who you surround yourself with.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you about this beyond the myth of marital happiness.
That was the first book that I wrote as a solo author. Um, and you can imagine how much my wife loved that title. Because she thought, oh, you mean our marriage is just a myth? It's just made up? It's not real? No, the idea of the book is that we've made happiness central to relationships in this country. And really in the Western world in general, but mostly in this country. Um, and that's been a good thing and a problem, because one of the things is that these close relationships can be wonderful sources of happiness and sources of all kinds of goodness, but they aren't necessarily so. But the more we make that our goal, the less likely it is to happen. That's why it's a myth. So one of the things you see in the history of marriage in the United States is that 200 years ago, virtually no one got divorced. And then it gradually increased over time, and it increased right up into the 60s and 70s. Some people will say there's a 50% divorce rate, but really the lifetime um, divorce potential is about 40%. And what's happened is the more we emphasize things like happiness and intimacy and love, the more fragile marriages have become. Um, they used to be very strong, and now they've become more fragile. And some people would say, well, that's not a bad thing, because if it's not a good relationship, maybe it's good that it ends. And it might be. I can't say that divorce is always the wrong thing. Uh, all I would say is that we need to be thinking about marriage in different terms, more in terms of things like trustworthiness and companionship and the kind of caring that develops over many years, not just the infatuation and love that happens in the early years. Those are really wonderful, but no one stays that way for very long. In a long-term relationship, people develop a very different kind of relationship with one another. It's not so much based on infatuation. Um, if you think about that in evolutionary terms, then infatuation is just kind of the glue that sticks us together for a while. So we have time to develop a better relationship. Um, and it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes we're infatuated and that's all it ever is. Um, But what I can tell you as an older person is that if we all stayed infatuated and all that emotionally intense for a long period of time, we might not last very long because it would burn us right out. Um, it's very exciting. It's very intense. But fortunately, that doesn't stay the main thing for a long time. So I think understanding marriage is understanding more about the longer term relationship and what it takes to make one and the kind of partner we want to attract. So um, one of the things about attraction is that people put a lot of emphasis on physical looks, which can be pretty important, but it's much more important for me to have a trustworthy partner than to have a gorgeous partner. you know, because if I have a gorgeous but untrustworthy partner, then really in a bad way. Uh, I might be very infatuated, or I might be very taken with this person, but they're going to be mean to me, or they're going to be unreliable, and that's not a good position to be in. It's just not worth it. Now, of course, you could have a beautiful and trustworthy partner. That's possible as well. But if I have to choose, I would choose the character values more than I would choose the physical values.
Yeah, yeah, I had to agree. I think a lot of people, sometimes they take it for granted, especially like you said when you're younger, because if you 18 or 20 or 21, and it's hard to see 60 and 50 years old, and you
It
know what I'm
is.
saying.
It
So
is. Yeah. But that's part of that wisdom, is being able to see a long-term future. What's life going to be like for me in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? Not just what is it like for me right now? Um, because if things go well, we stick around quite a long time, um, and that's a wonderful thing. Um, but if you don't plan for it, then you're going to be sadly disappointed, because you're going to get something different than what you thought you would.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Let me see, we're about 28 minutes in. Okay, I want to ask you about one more. Flourishing in the face of human limitations.
Yeah, that's a book that I wrote with a couple of long-term friends and colleagues. And the idea of that book is that, well, it runs against positive psychology a little bit, because positive psychologists like to emphasize the positive all the time. They like to say things like, well, if you have an unhappy situation, you need to just turn it around and make it a happy one. I don't think that's true. I think that sometimes negative things happen to us, and it's important to take into account what it is about this situation that's painful and difficult. Um, so the basic premise of the book is that all of us are dependent on other people. All of us have weaknesses and shortcomings and frailties. And so, how is it possible for us to be virtuous people or to live good lives if we're so flawed? Um, and the answer to that is that the virtues are exactly the characteristics that help us deal with those flaws. So Aristotle didn't just pick these things out of the air. He said, well, we live in relationships. We're social beings. So what do we need in order to be good social beings, to really do well at that? Well, we need to be trustworthy. We need to be honest. We need to be generous. We need to be forgiving. All these things. So these are all characteristics that help us to have good relationships. Because I'm going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And so we have to be able to forgive each other for those things and forgive ourselves. Um, and we have to be able to be honest when someone asks us something important. Um, and we have to be able to be fair to each other, or it's a real problem. So the idea of the book then is that we live good lives through our frailties and shortcomings, not in spite of them. So it's really kind of a way of saying that positive psychology is very one-sided, that we need to pay attention to both sides, both the good and the troubling. Um, because sometimes things are very difficult, and sometimes we suffer. So one of the examples I like to use is, what if you have a very good friend or a parent or a sibling or somebody who dies? That hurts a lot, and it might hurt for a long time. You might never get over it, as a matter of fact. And is that a good or a bad thing? Personally, I think it's a very good thing, because that pain is a way of honoring the loss and honoring what that person was to us. Um, and so, uh, we don't want to have unreasonable pain or excessive pain, but sometimes loss loss hurts, and it's okay that it does. It should hurt because we cared about this person. They were part of our lives. Um, so just one example. I gave you a bunch of examples of dependency as well. That's one of the big themes of the book is that we're very dependent. Um, so you notice that you ask a question, you get a professor response.
No, no, I appreciate you. I really do. Now I was gonna ask you this. Could I ask you about one of the journals? I wanted to
Yeah,
cover
sure.
that before. Okay, I wanted to ask you about I got this off the Miami profile, Cushman on Trumpist populism and its alternative.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah. Philip was a very good friend. He's one of these people that I feel pain about his loss still. Um, he was killed in a hit and run accident a couple of years ago, um, and he is just one of the most loving, beautiful people you'll ever meet. He could also he was wise, so he could also be tough and resilient as well. But he would write he wrote a number of articles. He didn't write a lot, but what he wrote he really poured himself into. And so what I talk about in terms of authenticity and commitment is the way that he would write. So he would never take cheap shots. He would only take expensive ones. uh, and the way he would do that is like he wrote this article about Trumpism because he was very bothered by it, and he had to do something with that difficulty. And so he wrote. That's what he did with his difficulties. He wrote. He was an author, and so he wrote about it. But he wrote about it in a way that he was really trying to understand people who follow the president-elect, um, and not just to pillory them or scapegoat them or see them in stereotypic ways. He would try to write about them as who they were and why it was that this seemed attractive to them. And this kind of empathy and uh, getting yourself into another person's shoes was a way that he would write. And I think that's part of what we need to be able to do to get past our polarization. And so this article was published after he died. Um, and so I was asked to write a response to it or a commentary on it. And part of my commentary was just to talk about what a wonderful man he was, because I couldn't do anything else. It's either not write it or write that. So um, anyway, so it was a very nice piece, and it really helped me to be able to understand better people who follow the president-elect because, from my perspective, they're very difficult to understand. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but he helped me to make more sense of what's happening.
Okay, okay. I really appreciate you taking the time out to break that down, and also thank you so much for coming on the platform. I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing. I look forward to the work that you have coming in the future. This has been a phenomenal episode. I'm still, processing a lot of the information that you shared, and I feel
Mhm.
like it's a lot of information that myself and the viewers can use to, improve our virtue, and our ethics, and make us better
Well,
people.
likewise, I really have a lot of appreciation for you, for podcasters, for all kinds of people who publicize this work, because I'm not very good at that. That's a good division of labor. So people who can reach out to other people and share things, that's really helpful to me because I'm not very good at it. So I get an opportunity to talk with you, and so I can talk about what I've been doing in a way that I don't normally do. So this is really beneficial to me too. Thanks.
It's an honor. It's an honor. Okay, so I'll edit this episode, but it probably won't be out until next year. So after the holidays and everything kind of go by,
Okay.
but I'll send you a link and you can see the edited version.
That'd be great. Yeah, because one of the things that's nice is to have these videos as something I can refer people to if they have questions or
Definitely.
um, And what I found out is that people who consider being a student of mine sometimes watch them, so they get an idea of what they're getting into, which is very smart.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay then. All right.
All
Take care now. I
right.
appreciate you.
Great to Taye.